Hello everyone. I'm Rafael, and I'm really glad to be here with you once again. I wanna say that it's a great opportunity to talk about this important topic, which is dialogue, right? So I will present the paper entitled "Dialogue Method: A Proposal to Foster Intra and Inter-Community Dialogic Engagement." Written by me, Professora Renata Toledo, and Pedro Jacobi. And in the future paper, we seek to present in detail a method which has been developed, tested, and analyzed since 2018 for learning and experiencing dialogue, which we believe can be used in encounters between people from the same or different communities. This method was inspired by the methodological ideas of David Bohm, William Isaacs, and Paulo Freire, as well as by my professional experiences in the field of education and environment. And it consists of two major interdependent cycles that alternate, a reflexive one and a deliberative one. And what I want to do here today is to show some details about each other. So let's start with the reflexive cycle. In that cycle, we have some important preconditions to start the process. Here, for example, it's very important to have the willingness to start a dialogue, the willingness to encounter with the other. Without that, we cannot have dialogues, right? Another precondition very important is respect, as proposed by William Isaacs, to see again and therefore go beyond our first impressions. Another precondition is curiosity, the genuine curiosity to understand why the other think and believe in an idea that doesn't make sense to me, or even that I don't agree with. Another one is to have no agenda, as proposed by David Bohm. And the last one is to let it go the necessity of knowing who is right and wrong at the end of the interaction. So with all this precondition in mind, we can start to exercise 4 practices that will help us to develop and enhance a critical thinking and a coherent thinking, as proposed by Paulo Freire and David Bohm, respectively. And these 4 practices are listening, identifying emotions and feelings, re-admiring, and speaking. And each one of these has some specific features. Because of my time, I will not tell about all of them, but I want to talk about a few. So listening in a dialogical way is to listen without making assumptions, without making judgments, and is listening even if we disagree from what is being said to us. And once we do that, it is possible to listen to ourselves, is listen to our body reactions, because when we listen to the other, our body reacts. And that's very important because all these reactions, which are our emotions and feelings, are very important indicators that some important idea that we have are being confirmed or disconfirmed. And once we realize that, we can do the third practice, which is re-admiring. And in that practice, we have 2 exercises. The first one is the attempt to identify what is that idea, or what is that value or belief that we have, and make us feel in the way we're feeling in the moment of the interaction. And after that, we can do a kind of self-archaeology, asking ourselves in what moment of our lives we learned that, with whom we learned that, in what context, and what are the benefits and the problems that this belief brought to our lives until this moment, and how it guiding our way of thinking and acting in our relationships with the other. And after we do that, we can understand a little better ourselves. And when we do that with the other, we can share by speaking our findings and enhance our comprehension about each other. And speaking in a dialogical way is to speaking in the first person of the singular without making generalizations, is to share our stories, our personal stories, our thoughts, our feelings, and is to make question in order to understand why the other think in a particular way. And all these four practices could happen in two different and interconnected moments. A moment, a first one is when we are with the other, in the presence of the other. And the other moment is when we are alone, but not completely alone. We are alone with the other in our memory. We have the virtual other, so we can continue the exercise of the four practices and therefore keep learning about ourselves and having new insights, new ideas that could be confirmed or disconfirmed in a new meeting, in a new encounter with the other, with other members of our community, of different communities. And all these practical exercise in this reflexive cycle could lead us to three types of outcomes. The first one is comprehension. People involved in this movement comprehend why the other think and act in the way they do. And that's very important because once we do that, we can, we probably will have less probability of make some judgments, misjudgments about the other, and maybe be guided by fear, mistrust, which keep us apart. Another possible outcome, maybe a most deep one, is characterized by the comprehension as the first one, but it has something more. Part of the people change their ideas in some measure about the topic of the dialogue. So for example, if there are a number of people talking about politics with different perspectives from different communities, it is possible that part of them embrace the ideas of other people, the whole ideas, or embrace part of these ideas, transforming their own. And we have a third possible outcome, and this, I believe, is the most profound one, in which we have the comprehension and we have a cognitive change of all the people involved, because emerge some important insights as proposed by David Bohm, and these insights became a shared meaning. And that new shared meaning that was not thought about by anyone involved in this gathering will make emerge in hypothesis the willingness to materialize it, to put it in action. And here, the community go from this reflexive cycle to the deliberative cycle, a big cycle composed by three important moments. The first one is the dialogic planning, where the community or different members from different communities will make some collective agreements, will share responsibilities, and will planning together what they want to do and how they want to do. After that, we go to a second moment that I call dialogic intervention, which is the moment of action, in which it is possible to learn a number of things. It's possible to learn about the process, about concepts, about skills, about the dynamics in the territory, the institutions, and that is very important, and will lead the community to a third moment, which is the dialogic evaluation, a moment in which all these people will need to decide if they want to make some adjustments in the process in order to achieve some planning goal, or if they think it is important to start a new reflexive cycle in order to enhance the collective comprehension about what they are living, about the new challenge that they find, and probably about some conflict that was emerged during this moment of action. And therefore, these two major cycles, keeping in a big movement of a continuous movement during time in order to help the community or members of different communities to work together, think and work together. So in summary, I want to say that we have these two major cycles: reflexive one with preconditions, 4 practices, and 3 types of outcomes, and a deliberative one with 3 moments: the dialogic planning, dialogic intervention, and dialogic evaluation. And to end my line here, I wanted to say that me and my colleagues, we hope that this method could be adopted and tested by academics and practitioners who work with communities, so we can see its efficiency and see how can we improve it in order to foster dialogue inside communities, between communities, to help us to face important problems of our times. Thank you very much.
So this is the joint presentation. Yeah, I'll go for the beginning. But we decided that the kind of save the time that I will head presentation and Élise and Vadim will join Justin with the discussion. I think this is a kind of a better way to keep the time, and time is short. So I'll go straight on the kind of the topic. So our idea in this paper and the previous project was to explore the idea of cross-regional dialogues, introduce the idea, test it, and then develop the idea. And the main objective is to address this kind of problems which appears in so-called protected conflicts, and especially with the civil society-based dialogues. So in a nutshell, what we talk about the cross-regional dialogues is this kind of an informal platform of local peace builders on various areas affected by protected conflict. So they are trying to bypass in this kind of a polarized bilateral settings, and also this kind of going beyond the one conflict focused discussions and dialogues. And then that's why perhaps managing to suspend the kind of antagonizing roles which are typical to protected conflict setting in all levels. So we had a project. It runs in, well, in pre-COVID time, in pre-Karabakh war time. So it's ended already end of 2019. So, and our focus area was South Caucasus and Moldova, and what is typical for these conflicts in this area are the so-called de facto states. We have Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, so disputed territories declared to be independent. We have 3 phases in the project. So first, we kind of trying to scrutinize the existing peace processes and how it's been dealt with the kind of civil society dialogues, its possibility limitations, and especially the kind of challenges it has met. And then we try to learning from meeting with and engaging with the local peace builders. We travel in the area, meet a lot of local actors and talk with them, engage with them. And what we mean by local peace builders is it's just a kind of it's not professional position, something that if the local activities call themselves as a peace builder, they were peace builders. So it's just a kind of a symbol. Then we organized 2 experimental dialogue forums. So to bring them, the selected people together and also test our ideas. It comes from all these regions which we are here. And then we have analyzed the material, and we have a policy paper, but not the kind of academic paper on these basics. So where we trying to kind of address with these kind of a new cross-regional dialogue forums is the first that we recognize that there's very limited space for dialogue. The kind of also the civic society is very much polarized kind of and in the case of protected conflicts, there's a particular problem with the kind of engaging the kind of people from these disputed territories to any kind of dialogues beyond their limits. And there's also another kind of a question about dealing with the ownership. The people are tired of a kind of a third-party dialogues. They're always the same people are participating in the dialogues. And in many of the kind of processes, the civil society actors are just excluded when we call on an upper level. So we are looking from this kind of cross-regional dialogue and look about how which is the kind of potential form of addressing all these challenges, and that could be open up something new. So at least I think it's really opening up new spaces for dialogue. When in the cases where the opportunities for bilateral dialogue is also very limited, and cross-regional dialogues enable participation and connection that would otherwise be impossible or highly problematic. And I think in particular that kind of engaging the people, individuals on the Vaxter states, which are not so easy. They are depoliticizing the kind of dialogues, because in party settings, all questions are polarized and politicized. And they are desecretizing also the dialogues. They're creating kind of a more secure dialogue forums. They give them kind of more secure possibilities to enter the dialogue, because there's a lot of political control and surveillance in the areas. So this is not as suspicious that form of dialogues, that they are not taking form of official dialogues. So why we're seeing that's kind of bringing local peace builders from different public affected areas together, how it makes the things different. And I think that here we say that actually what is matters that the cross-regional dialogues do not mirror official negotiation frameworks, so they are not trying to kind of really own the peace processes. They are completely different lines. They are not focusing on particular conflicts or solving the conflicts. They are not problem solving. They are focusing cross-cutting issues, some over kind of general issues. They are more problem finding discussion, problem finding dialogues. And they are more concentrating on learning and creating a kind of sharing the experiences with each others. So here is quickly about the kind of how we organize our two experimental forums, what are the particular formats which we decided to call. We call it the handpicked participants. We engage with a lot of local peace activities, peacemakers, and then engage with them who we're seeing is ready to coming up, ready to kind of for the sharing the ideas in this kind of a format. The important issue was informality. They were kind of it's beyond this kind of any kind of a formal kind of a platform of a peace discussion. And we stress that even the people working in different kind of associations and different kind of foundations, they come as individuals. They don't come they don't represent any official or any institutions. They come as in, and that we escape this kind of concentration that you have to present certain roles. We embedded academic context because we think this is kind of a soften this kind of a conflict-oriented discussion, and then we have OCCA links, we have OCCA representatives in these meetings, which was important for local to participate on these meetings because they see that they can transmit their message. Then we call beyond the regions. We have actually the meetings in Stuttgart and Vienna, and then I think that you cannot organize this kind of a cross-regional dialogue forum with all kind of areas. There have to be something common, something joined. So here we pick up the kind of areas which share the same kind of same history, same problems, but have also differences. And we don't take the role as a kind of a facilitator, mediator. We let them to decide a lot what we were discussing, how we're proceeding, but we started with the same kind of more or less an academic inputs in the beginning, and then let the work, the kind of forums going on and discussion going on. So what we're seeing as achievement as a kind of our kind of experimental dialogue forums, I think that how we're seeing that how this kind of cross-regional dialogue are important. They enable informal knowledge exchange and networking among local peace builders. Of course, they're doing that already before, but not as much cross-regionally. they're doing within the complex things. So this is really important in a case when all kind of relationships are excluded. The enabling participation of civil society peacemakers on disputed territories and or de facto state. This is very important because they are mostly excluded for any kind of internationalized dialogue forums on this kind of area. They enable knowledge exchange also between local and international peace builders, and that I think the local seem very important that they are someone listening to them, even not as a kind of official participant, but they can share the ideas with someone coming from OCCA, someone coming from Vienna. They often need, I think in what we learned, the new types of stimuli, the people even they have participated in a lot of different kind of forums before, but the new settings, a new kind of a mix of different professional academics and peacemakers give some new ideas. In that case, we're seeing that they support local peace builders' capacity for making agenda in the different processes, empowering the agency, and perhaps itself is seen. They built informal bridges. How important they are in future? Well, we didn't even look about that. This is kind of a breakthrough silver bullet for this kind of a conflict, but just as some kind of a new act. And they really created a dialogical space and help, yeah, in that sense, one way contribute and address the protected conflicts. I think that's in a nutshell what we were exploring in our projects, but we are happy to share a lot of more ideas. It was a kind of a very interesting experiment and something we want to share with ideas with you. So thank you.
Basically, we would like to start by saying that it's still a work in progress, and we're still working on further insights that have emerged from the field work, and we're still elaborating on them or reflecting more on how they come about. And we will start by briefly outlining the context of our research, and then we will go to our preliminary understandings from the field work. So what has been termed as the 2015 European refugee crisis has produced new legal and policy frameworks and transformed the European border regime in ways that impacted the bodies and lives of people on the move via increased securitization, restrictions and marginalization. Still, Greece, with a struggling economy, has been at the forefront of this refugee crisis, both as a place of transition and as a place of permanent and temporary settlement for displaced people arriving mostly from the Turkish shores. A number of people among them were Turkish citizens who fled Turkey, particularly after the failed coup attempt in 2016. Witnessing this increased settlement of Turkish citizens after 2016 in Athens and in Salonika, we were wondering about the reasons that influenced people to choose us as Athens as a new home, particularly bearing in mind the trajectory of enmity and friendship between the two countries and imagined communities, and how people negotiate and potentially resolve the stereotypes springing from this trajectory of relations in their everyday lives in Athens. So just briefly, a narrative in the historical political trajectories of Greek-Turkish relations. A narrative of age-old enmities between Greece and Turkey has been weaved into the construction of the Greek national identity. And national narratives that reproduced anti-Ottoman, anti-Turkish, and more recently anti-Islam sentiments are still breathing today. However, this relationship is not really clear-cut, since despite these enemy images, there are also significant practices of friendship, both at the level of state politics and interpersonal relations. As Karakatsanis argues, visions about the left, democracy and friendship developed alike in both Greece and Turkey during the late 70s and early 80s, and were consequently transformed into specters haunting each other, in a way linked inseparably with the other in political discourse and practices. However, it is also argued that cross-border practices oscillated between nationalism and pacifism. After 1999, where significant events took place, both in terms of conflicts and in terms of coming together due to earthquakes, the Greek-Turkish friendship had already become a popular discourse taken up by political and business elites, cultural NGOs and civil society groups, abandoning its previously radical character, and in a way developing a new political grammar of rapprochement emerging based on common interests and EU priorities. However, this, in a way, fluctuating friendship simultaneously has been affected by lasting stereotypes of potential invasion and threat, and exacerbated, at least in the case of Greece, and exacerbated with the dominance of neoliberal and neoconservative politics in both countries, and particularly post-2010, with the electoral success of ultra-right-wing governments in Greece and Turkey. So we were wondering if we can we can speak of an ongoing protracted dialogue, in many inverted commas, that shifts according to political conjunctures. So from the 70s and particularly during the 80s, a significant number of Turkish citizens migrated to Greece, most of them for political reasons. Their settlements in Athens, for the majority of them, was facilitated by political and party organizations, and through the creation or co-formation of spaces and organizations that supported not only the communities here, but also relations and interactions with Turkey. For Turkish citizens who want present-day Greece to be their place of permanent or temporary residency, the main pathway to get a residence permit is the asylum procedure. Even for those wishing to move elsewhere, after 2015, the asylum procedure has become the main way to transcend the strict border regimes. For various reasons, for migrating, the number of Turkish citizens' asylum application rose significantly after 2016, from 110 applications in 2011 to 10,500 applications between the years 2016 and 2019. A different pathway for obtaining a residence permit includes a tourist or an employment visa, of course, marriage or partnership, and through the Golden Visa program. Launched in 2012, the Golden Visa program grants a 5-year residence permit and mobility within the Schengen area for visitors and for investors and their families in exchange for €250,000 real estate investment in the country, in Greece. And the Turkish citizens are the second larger applicant group in this category of residence permit. Very briefly about the way we went in our fieldwork and in our reflections. The discussions with our informants focus more on their everyday negotiations with locals, their social relations, and their everyday challenges and aspirations. Our discussions have presented a great variety of gender, class, religion, and migration trajectories, which also reflects the very diverse socioeconomic situations and reasons for moving from Turkey to Greece. The field research coincided with the density of events in international, national, and local level. The diplomatic tensions between the EU and Turkey due to the EU-Turkey common statement regarding migration and asylum affected significantly the Greek-Turkish borders and was exemplified in the March 2020 border tensions at the Evros region. And second, the more restrictive shift in public discourses and policies regarding migration following the government change in Greece in 2019. And third, the outbreak of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown measures that were imposed in different cities around the world, and of course in Athens. So apart from the methodological concerns, the pandemic, a broader xenophobic context in Athens, which has increased in the last years, and the Greek-Turkish diplomatic tension, all of them gave rise to a number of ethical questions for us. So our role as researchers belonging to the host in inverted commas communities, seeking to interview people recently arriving in a country, while many of them having experienced trauma or loss or experienced conditions of precarity, vulnerability, and marginalization, brought into question the power relations also entailed in the research process and in our roles in this process. We cannot, in a way, we can start by saying a bit about what we started discussing and how we were thinking after the discussion with our informants. And we cannot start elaborating on the everyday life in the way of our discussion without beginning with the ever-present influence that the historical and geopolitical relations of Greece and Turkey have upon them, which sustains rather stereotypical perceptions of enemies and friends. The majority of our discussions were faced with questions from locals regarding contemporary Turkish politics, not due to their local interest on international affairs, but as a signifier of their identity in relation to Greece. Being against or critical of Erdogan, its government and its policies, faction to an extent as a proof of friendship or of well-intention towards their new home in Athens. Although our discussants' political affiliations differ substantially from non-political to activist, they were in a way coerced into declaring their non-allegiance to Turkey's present-day government, even if this was or wasn't the reason for their own migration. So akin to practices of not so banal nationalism, for those who watched the local news, it came as in Athens, it came as a surprise the amount of media and political time devoted to Turkish politics, implicitly or explicitly sustaining the nationalist argument of Turkey as a threat, and the extent that such attitudes still shape local people's perception. Of course, we cannot generalize because we cannot actually talk about everybody. As mentioned, this enemy of my enemy is my friend attitude expressed by local Greeks possibly contributes to having to our informants having better treatment than other foreigners, as they observed. Although some have experienced incidents of everyday racism, their attitude to it they attribute it to being generally foreigners rather than being Turkish, and they tended to evaluate their own experiences more favorably when contrasted to the experiences of other migrants in the city. Yet at the same time, this enemy of my enemy is my friend, consists in an inescapable reminder of belonging neither here nor there, while raising questions about how they would be perceived if this wasn't the case. Thus, we could argue that the new Turkish locals find themselves in a continuous process of negotiating or in a position of being in a dialogue with the historical political trajectory of the two countries and how it becomes constantly reshaped by the present conjunctures in their personal lives. This becomes also the local context as well as the context in Turkey and the broader conditions become detrimental for their own personal aspirations and future. Living in Athens doesn't mean that it has been a first choice of relocation for many, but rather an easier option in terms of multiple proximities, not only spatial. Most of our discussants claim that they like living in the city since they feel free and safer in Athens than they were where they lived for a number of reasons, ranging from not being persecuted or constantly checked by the police to being able to dress as they wish and walk where they wanted or other affinities. However, anxiety about their future, in Athens or elsewhere, was also apparent. Language and the limitations in learning Greek was a detrimental factor for most. Without language skills, opportunities for finding work are very limited, while it also hinders their relationships and interactions with locals, causing a further stress and anxieties about their future. The past and present financial crisis and its repercussions, the rise in conservatism, gender equalities, and the local xenophobic reactions towards migrants all intensify a feeling of having no future in a city, besides a precarious one, a feeling that has been prevalent in many of our discussions. This was further accentuated when reflecting on their lives in Turkey, particularly those that had better jobs. Thus, while settling in Athens, they simultaneously considered developing as alternative strategies for integration or moving further along in the future, which was particularly acute for those with a university education or higher incomes. What is also important to say is that we're not working with a fixed or a very defined notion of community, since we cannot claim that our discussants belong to one community. Besides sharing the common characteristic of being a Turkish citizen who settled in Athens post-2016 and speak Turkish, their personal trajectories are very different, reflecting the rich diversity of people consisting this category of new Turkish citizens in Athens. Class, gender, and migration status differences feature prominently, crucially impacting on opportunities and their limitations, their choices as well while living in Athens, their permanency of residency here, and their personal networks. Women's groups emerged as a very significant space for support, socialization, and sometimes politicization. And they could be both physical or virtual, or both. Similarly, political groups and affiliations of Turkish, Kurdish, and Greek individuals remade communities along the lines of shared political struggles, which nonetheless also transformed into more intimate support networks for all aspects of life. Work, particularly in major call centers, also created new personal networks among Turkish residents, as did some architecture and real estate firms due to the Golden Visa program. Being involved in civil society groups, specific religious communities, or in their neighborhood was another way of developing their own networks in the city. People who came to Athens due to love migration were inserted into the networks of most of their partner, which tended to be mostly Greek, while also trying to develop their own friendships and networks. So irrespective of having social networks prior to moving to Athens or not, several of our discussions mentioned that they ended up socializing with people that they wouldn't necessarily do if they were in Turkey. As such, we cannot claim to explore a community, but rather diverse and flexible communities whose boundaries are more porous or somehow become constellations of micro-communities in which an individual belongs to temporarily or not. Since we are also focusing on the city level, just briefly describing that present-day Athens is a mixed city regarding its ethnic and religious composition. The urban fabric is characterized by vertical rather than horizontal segregation, which contributes to the diversity of many of its neighborhoods, particularly in the city center. And despite this everyday multiculturalism, this doesn't mean that racism, discriminations, and exploitations are not present. After 2015, an increased number of refugees joined this population, both temporarily and more permanently, along with numerous humanitarian and community organizations which reformed the civil society landscape. Although many of its inner city neighborhood rents were relatively cheap, the situation changed significantly in the past 5 years due to increased gentrification and touristification trends that removed a significant part of the rental market away. And nevertheless, the marks of the financial economic crisis and the austerity measures are still present, and finding employment remains a challenge. And that was particularly acute in the pandemic. Some places and neighborhoods emerged as key references for our discussions, reflecting both differentiation in terms of individual life paths, housing choices, and stability. Life paths. Housing choices and stability are more available to those with higher incomes, Golden Visa status, or Greek partners, while others face much more precarious housing conditions and depend on their own support networks. There seemed to be a relative preference for central neighborhoods over other for many reasons, mostly associated with personal acquaintances and networks and neighborhood diversity. For some, there was even some sort of nostalgic resemblance of some Athenian neighborhoods with places where they lived in Istanbul and Izmir. The diversity of our discussions is also reflected on the different places that emerge as meeting places. For them, some restaurants and cafes become points of references for getting to know people and for meeting their communities. These often correspond to places established or frequented by Turkish citizens already living in Athens since many years. And public spaces such as central parks and the seaside also functioned as meeting places, especially during COVID lockdowns. However, since urban life was massively disrupted during the lockdowns, the role of such meeting places as places of not just interaction, but forming social relationship might alter in the present. And this is briefly some of the places where people frequented and thought they could develop their own social relationships more. And basically, just to close, I think what started to appear, and we would like to elaborate much more from further on, but started to be very evident from our findings, was this haunting of the condition of the enemy of my enemy being my friend as a precondition and as a very significant element in the new identity, or in how people were approached, went into dialogue and in their new home. And I think this was something that we would like to look more together with further reflection that we're going to have.